Greetings, I'm Theodoros Kalsidis, a senior project engineer with Konemis, and today I will be sharing some insights on Salesforce data migration based on personal experiences. Salesforce data migration. Here are certain things that people wish they knew actually before starting. Usually, most Salesforce data migration videos or guides will tell you that it's a relatively simple process, like map your fields, load your data, and then you're done. That's about 30-40% of the story. The other 60-70%, that's where the migrations basically quietly fail. Not because of tools, not because of a lack of assumption, but actually incorrect estimates and evaluations on the actual data itself. And actually, those assumptions and evaluations are almost always wrong. The first real step in a migration is not necessarily the mapping, it's data discovery, assessing and analyzing the actual data from the source. You need to understand what actually exists in your system, not what the documentation says, because those are usually two different things. For example, you would have appearing in no particular order, you would have, for example, pre-text notes field, duplicate identifiers or duplicate entries in emails or in phone numbers, invalid entries, empty required fields due to a change in the configuration. Now, these are some things that you would normally find where fields in places that have no real use, but are still populated, status values that no one can explain, business logic that's possibly hidden inside free text. I've personally seen things that would be considered simple fields with over 20, 30, 40 different entries that all would have slightly different meanings, and only a couple of them, or rather a handful of them, would be used. A data model or the source data model effectively is a theory or a basis to build upon, and the actual data is the reality. Now, once you understand the data, you would then have a solid basis to move to the mapping. And this is where most people tend to oversimplify things, in that the mapping is not always a technical exercise. It's also a business interpretation exercise. For example, you would have, in certain scenarios, one source object becoming multiple destination Salesforce objects, or one field or values within that one specific field would become several derived values and placed into different other destination fields, or multiple fields getting merged, concatenated into one. For example, a customer in the source system might effectively become an account, a contact, or even perhaps even a loyalty record, depending on the context in which you're executing a data migration. Now, if you were to treat the mapping as like a spreadsheet task, you will eventually miss out on the actual meaning behind the data and how they're used. Here's also another example of things that tutorials do not really emphasize enough. For example, relationships are what break or make the migration successful. Not necessarily the volume or the performance itself, but the relationships between the relevant entries. For example, we would need in a specific sequence, we would have a parent, a child, and a grandchild. This is where you need to know the actual sequence of that loading aspect, in that we need to load the data in the correct order and obviously have a way to reconnect everything. That's exactly where functionality like external identifiers or common identifiers come into place, in that we would need to be building certain crosswalk tables depending on what kind of system you're looking at or what kind of migration requires these kind of relationship statuses. We would need also temporary keys and a matching logic between those systems. If your relationship strategy isn't solid, then the migration might look fine in testing initially, but it will most likely completely fail in the actual production whenever the time comes. And especially this is a very solid point to keep track of in regards to the transformation aspect. Speaking of transformation aspect, this is where the majority of the effort goes, the data transformation, where that's easily 60 to 80% of the actual work that is required. For example, we're not just moving data, we are reshaping it depending on the necessity of the destination concept, whether that's a loyalty program or a transactional revenue aspect, or even just a sales-based scenario. Every edge case matters. That one specific simple status field that we talked about previously, it might need 15 or 20 different rules just to be able to behave correctly, to accommodate specific edge cases and that's actually also where the experience really shows, because these are not exceptions. These are the rule that define the actual use case. And let us assume that even after all of that, we have been able to load the data successfully. This does not necessarily mean that the actual migration has worked, because technical success is not business success. Users would need to test not just record counts, but also the field accuracy, the relationships, and the most important thing of all, business scenarios, like users, like can the end user, the customer itself, actually do their job with this migrated data. I've personally seen migrations where everything supposedly matched perfectly, but reports didn't work, processes failed, flows were stuck in the configuration level, and users didn't really trust the system. Then you have the cutover. This is where actually things become real. We have a very specific downtime window, and that more often than not is much shorter than we would realistically want. There are data changes even at the last minute, and something unexpected will happen, and there's no way around it most of the time. It always does. This is why experienced teams always plan for multiple dry runs before full UAT loads to be able to simulate the overall data migration flow and strategy. A rollback option, as well as the delta loads to accommodate for the last minute changes also. The first run basically is a rehearsal. The second is learning. And the third and final one is usually the one that counts, right? If there are a few things at the end of the day to take away from all of this, is that clean data beats complete data. We should focus, or we always recommend that users focus on automating everything that you can. Manual steps or introducing manual steps and efforts around complex iterations and configurations will fail under pressure. Business involvement is also not optional, but mandatory. And if something feels at the beginning, like at the early stages, if something feels unclear or obscure, it will become a blocker later, at the very least, an issue. And at the end of the day, Salesforce data migration isn't just about moving data, it's about making that data usable. So focus as much on tools as on understanding the data that you have. Thank you for watching. If this video was helpful, subscribe to our channel for more useful information. For details or inquiries, please visit our website by the link in the video description.